Bryce and welcome back to my YouTube channel, Jacket Trades. This is part 2 in our build series for the brand new RC10CC, the Classic Clear. So in our last video we built up the chassis and we stopped just before doing the shocks. In this video we finished the shocks, we installed those, and then we did miscellaneous chassis bits, and we did the wheels and got those mounted as well. In our next video, we'll go ahead and move on to the body. So as you can see, we now have a running RC10CC, and to be honest, I couldn't help myself, and I have taken it out and I have christened it with its first scratch on the bottom of the chassis. So it is broken in. The build went pretty good. With the exception of the body, the only other major issue I had was that my chassis brace tube here was too short, and it's actually a defective part. It's short by about 3/16 of an inch. So I've put in a ticket with Team Associated, and hopefully they'll send me out a new part. It's not a big deal. I actually did receive the body today. So within a couple of days of putting in that ticket, I have received a brand new body for the build. What other thing? Issues. Not really issues, just things. In the instructions, it talks about setting the preload on the diff. If you set it to what they have in the manual, it's way too loose. I found that I had to basically... So what you're supposed to do is you compress that spring completely, then you back off the nut until it's flush with the drive shaft. I found that you have to turn it about a turn and a half to get it to engage properly so that it's not slipping. As far as radio gear goes, I am running a Trinity slot machine as kind of an homage to the original slot machine, which is a motor that for some reason it tugs at the nostalgic heartstrings for me. I don't know why. It's basically a stock motor. So as a kid, I think the slot machine is one of the motors that I had in my collection. So it's one of the motors that I remember. It was like the slot machine, the pocket rocket. There's a couple of motors that I had, and they just kind of stuck with me in my memory. So I saw that Trinity had a brushless slot machine available, and so I picked that up just because it has the label slot machine, and I threw it in this car. I'm running a Hobby Wing just stock ESC. This is their 60 amp ESC. So the cooling fan on it actually sticks proud to the chassis, so I took it off just so the body would fit properly. What I might end up doing in the long run is moving the speed controller over to the middle of the car and putting a shelf in here to support the speed controller. I've also ordered a new servo. Now this is kind of a shelf queen car in the sense that it's not going to get run a lot. But I saw that Reef's RC has a raw, low-profile servo, and it looks like it would go great with this build. So I went ahead and picked up the servo. It's a Reef's RC raw 400 LP. There's little bits here and there that I've tweaked just to get this to work for me. I had to add some spacers in here for the body to fit properly. I had some shims on the wheels. There's some things you can do with the shocks as far as where you put washers. So I think after I do the build series, I will do another video kind of outlining some of the quote-unquote upgrades or hop-ups you can do to kind of make it more usable. And yeah, so that'll be another video. So I guess without further ado, I'll flip the camera on and we'll get into finishing this build. Thanks for tuning in and watching. Take care. Bye. Alright, so we are getting into the next phase of the build where we wrap up the suspension with shocks, the miscellaneous chassis bits, electronics, and wheels. For the shocks, we're going to move on to bag G, step 1. Let's go ahead and get our bag open. So that completes bag G step 1. So now we move on to bag G step 2, where we put in the seal pack for each of the shock bodies. bag G step 2. Now we're going to move on to bag G step 3. Alright, so that completes bag G step 3. So now we move on to bag G step 4. Looks like there's a lot of reading to do here. So I've got this little vacuum chamber. It sucks out the air bubbles from the shocks. So let's see how this works. Alright, let's give it a go. Alright, so that concludes bag G step 4. These are harder than I remember them, getting them bled properly. They don't have diaphragms, so it's a little trickier to make sure you have just the right amount of oil so that you're not hydrostatically seizing them. So now we move on to bag G step 5, where we finish assembling the shocks. Alright, so that finishes bag G step 5. So now we move on to bag G step 6, where we install the front shocks. Alright, so that wraps up bag G step 6. Alright, so now we move on to bag G step 7, the rear shocks. That concludes bag G step 7. It's starting to look like something. Starting to look awesome. Alright, so now we're going to move on to bag H step 1. These are kind of the miscellaneous chassis bits. So I just found another defect. So I have these two chassis braces, right? And one is shorter than the other, and what it looks like is sometimes when you buy bar stock, they mark the ends with paint to indicate the size of it. And so this looks like the end of the bar where they ran out of material. So usually they have like a bar feeder that feeds the stuff into a lathe. The lathe has live tooling on it, so it can do all the cross drilling. But this part came up short. For now, I'll put a spacer in there, but I'm gonna have to contact Team Associated to get a replacement parts because that is a defect in the kit. Fortunately, this probably is not going to happen to anyone else because this is kind of an unusual case. So with that being said, that sort of wraps up bag H step 1. I need to get a replacement tube, and then once I get the radio gear in, I'll figure out where I want to put my antenna tube. So now we're kind of jumping around a little bit. It says we're moving on to bag I step 1, but we are using some parts from bag H with the battery tray. Alright, so with that, we are done with bag I step 1. So now we're going to move on to bag I step 2, where we assemble the steering servo. For the steering servo, I'm going to use this Hobby Star HS3301LV. It's just a servo that I had sitting around, and the reason I'm using it is because it's a low profile servo. So I'm hoping I can squeeze that servo in around there without hitting the chassis. So I'm going to go ahead and center my servo first. Alright, so there we have our servo assembled, and that concludes bag I step 2. So now we're going to move on to bag I step 3, where we install the servo. So I don't know what the intent is here, but the Z-bend does not look like it's going to go in that material. The arm is way too thick for that. Alright, so I'm going to start by countersinking this hole. So it's kind of basically, the hole will become hourglass shaped. On that Z-bend, as you insert it into the bell crank, there is a note here that says to chamfer the top of the hole. I recommend you chamfer both top and bottom of the hole so that the hole is kind of hourglass shaped. We've kind of jumped ahead a little bit. As we get into bag I step 4, that's where you kind of make up the final linkage with the servo, which we've done, and then you're installing the receiver and the speed controller. For my speed controller, I'm going to use this Hobby Wing XR10 just stock. So the brushless motor that I'm going to run is kind of an homage to the vintage slot machine from Trinity. They have a brushless version of that motor. Alright, it's starting to look like a car with the speed controller and receiver mounted. That concludes bag I step 4. So now we're going to move on to bag I step 5, but this hardware in this step is actually found in bag J. It should be noted also that the pinion gear on this kit is not included, so you'll need a pinion gear for what I believe is a 48 pitch spur. Alright, so we got the motor installed, the gear cover. That concludes bag I step 5, or bag J really. And I guess bag I step 6 is the battery installation, which we've already done. I've managed to squeeze this LiPo stick pack with the lead towards the rear of the car, and that seems to work okay. So now we get into the wheels with bag J step 1. Alright, so that was pretty straightforward. We got wheels now. We're getting close. So now we move on to bag J step 2, where we install the wheels to the car. wheels mounted, we have a car. And that is the end of Bag J step 2. So in the next video we'll get into the body, getting it painted up and mounted. We need to do some wiring on the ESC and battery leads, but I think she's ready to go. Looks like we're towed out a little bit, so we can adjust, fix our toe a little bit, and pretty cool. Thanks for tuning in and watching to the end. Take care. Bye.